All right. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome everyone to tonight's Sports Medicine Fellow Council webinar, the PM&R Fellow Panel, sharing their advice and insights on preparing for the Sports Medicine Fellowship match. This will be an incredible opportunity for resident and student members to learn from current fellows that have successfully matched or soon to be current fellows. My name is Ben Kopecky, and I'll be serving as the moderator tonight. It's been my pleasure to serve a one-year term as the fellow member liaison to the Sports Ultrasound Committee and as one of the officers of the AMSSM Sports Medicine Fellow Council. I'm a graduate of the PM&R residency program at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, and I'm finishing up my Sports Medicine Fellowship at the University of Iowa. And I'll be moving to Indianapolis soon to join Franciscan Sports Medicine this fall. So tonight we're honored to have six member PM&R speaker of our panel. They're current and incoming fellows. I'd like each one of them to introduce themselves and say their name and their sports medicine fellowship, as well as its city and state, along with where they completed their PM&R residency. Also, I just want to note that these sessions are a really good opportunity for networking. So if any of our panelists are willing to share their contact info or their emails in the chat, I'd invite them to enter those now. So somebody can just lead us off.
Yeah, I can go. So I'm Lori Bjork. I'm a current PM&R resident at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, and I am matched to a sports medicine fellowship at UC Davis. So that's the undergrad campus is in Davis, California, and the sports medicine fellowship is in Sacramento.
All right. Hey, everyone. My name is Raj. I'm a PGY4 resident at UPMC in Pittsburgh. I'll be starting my sports medicine fellowship at UPenn in Philly. And then I'm also the incoming fellow member liaison for the research committee, taking on HC's role.
I'm Andrew. I'm finishing my residency at Georgetown National Rehab here in DC, and I'm the incoming fellow that is going to be at UPMC. So I'm kind of replacing Raj in some capacity. But yeah, I'll be in Pittsburgh.
Hey everyone, I'm Cam. I am also a resident at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. I'll be doing my sports medicine fellowship at Mayo Clinic Square in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm excited to get going and I'm excited to be here.
I can go next. So I'm Ryan. I'm one of the fourth year PMR residents at Case Western Metro Health. I will be heading out to Utah next week for Utah Valley Intermountain Sports Fellowship. So really excited.
Hi, my name is HC. I'm a current sports medicine fellow at Master Brigham Spalding. I did my residency here, stayed on as a sports medicine fellow, and then I'll be staying on here as a faculty member.
Excellent. Well, I think that's everyone. So thanks everyone for being here. Really excited to get this group together. So before we dive in, I just want to note that this session is designed to be interactive. So to all of our audience members, please use the chat or raise your hand with questions at any point, and I'll read them out or call on you. So I'll lead us off with a question to get us going and kind of move things along, fill in any gaps as needed. But again, we want to hear from you. So to our panelists, first question, when you were deciding where to apply, what filters actually narrowed your list? Location, case mix, research, culture. Was there anything you wish that you weighed differently?
Yeah, great question. Oh, go ahead.
So thanks, Cam. I think when I was originally looking for trying to find fellowships to apply to, it was actually more overwhelming than I thought. It was similarly to residency, where you're really relying on websites and word of mouth, which is actually extremely helpful. But I think coming from the PMR background, I think there's a few different ways you can go about it. One, everyone's going to look at location, just what works best for you, your family. But two, you can kind of start breaking it into primary care-based fellowship programs and PMR-based fellowship programs. And that way you can start to delineate which type of program you may or may not want to be in. The PMR heavy programs generally, I would say, often end up being less coverage, more procedural based opportunities, things like fluoro, EMGs, ultrasound. That being said, plenty of primary care sports programs have those things as well. Just often with the primary care side of things, you end up with a little bit more coverage based primary care stuff. And depending on what you're looking out in a fellowship, you can kind of start to shape your list from there. For me, I wanted to find that more primary care based side of things to be a team physician. So I applied almost like a 50-50 mix, I think. There's like 20 or so PMR programs. And I think I applied to most of those and then threw in a decent amount of primary care sports programs as well.
I think in addition to what Ryan did, which I think was a similar starting point to me, I think other filtering that I ended up doing, because it is tough to narrow down, was thinking about, I knew that I did not want to do spine. And oftentimes people think when you're PM&R that that's what you do. And so to me, it was important to try to filter not only how much spine is there in the PM&R, respective PM&R sports fellowships, but sometimes they have some spine, but when you actually talk to current or recent fellows, they will tell you, well, when it push came to shove and they started getting through their year and they found out they weren't going to do fluoro in their practice, they were able to kind of move away from that. And so I kind of prioritized programs where it seemed like it was less spine heavy because I knew that was not an interest of mine and I really wanted to focus on the ultrasound. So that was an additional narrowing piece for me. And then I think as I got to filling out my list, maybe I had 7 or 8 programs I was super excited about. And then filling out my list, honestly, a filter became, are you a virtual interview or not? Because when you're filling out a list, you don't want to be traveling to places that are going to be further down your list, to be quite honest. And so I think just because you don't have enough vacation time to be able to make all those trips. So that became a filtering variable for me.
I leaned really heavily. I agree with everything they said so far. And then I knew what I wanted my fellowship experience to look like, as Ryan and Lori have mentioned, and really prioritize those programs. But I had to rely really heavily on word of mouth. I think it's been mentioned before that it's like hard to know what a program is really like based on the website. It's probably harder than residency. And so I talked a lot with people who had applied before me to get kind of their perspective on their interview experience. And then the AMSSM fellowship fair at the actual conference itself is super helpful. So there were a few places that were kind of on my radar, and like being able to talk to them at the fellowship fair, ask them direct questions, kind of move the needle one way or the other in terms of whether I was actually going to apply. So I would recommend that everybody do that.
Yeah, I'll echo again everything that folks have said so far. So I was a little bit indifferent to location just because it's a 1-year fellowship, and I kind of just wanted to kind of get as much information about programs as I wanted and was willing to kind of be flexible in that sense. I also kind of applied both to PM&R based programs and family medicine or primary care based programs, knowing that there are some that do a mix of procedural and diagnostic ultrasound, even some spine care like you would get in a PM&R program. But I think for me, I kind of prioritized PMR programs more so, just because I think I wanted to rely on some of the skills and kind of have my core faculty be PM&R based and kind of have that same perspective and training with the option to kind of work with other providers who have either a primary care or an alternative kind of background in their sports medicine practice. I definitely prioritize culture a lot, and you're spending a year very closely with a core group of faculty. And to me, being able to meet as many of them, both at the kind of yearly annual conference and then across the interviews, I think was really important. So I went to as many in-person interviews as I could to kind of get a sense of what the culture was really like, and really just kind of try to find who I thought I would be able to kind of work well with throughout the 1-year period.
Yeah, I'll echo what everyone is saying here. I would say it's never too early to even filter and figure out what programs you want to go to. I would say it's like, it's a pretty good idea to start talking to fellows, people who are in it right now, and kind of get a feel of what you want out of not just your program, but also in what you want in your career. So for me, like there were three big things that kind of three big buckets that I was thinking of was geography, what type of skill set I wanted, and also mentorship. And so for me, like some of those components kind of changed a little bit throughout residency, and then I kind of fine-tuned it during the interview season. And so I was already kind of filtering even before application season, and then from there, I just got a kind of a better feel of what I wanted out of my career, and that's how I ranked my programs in general.
The only thing I'll add to those excellent answers is just is the sports coverage that you'll do or want to do, I think is an important thing because no program's perfect. Some do, you get a ton of high school coverage, some high level college, some professional. So just having that in mind, I think would be something to kind of use in that decision of where to apply. So keeping in sort of the pre sort of interview questions, Jeffrey asked, for programs with virtual interviews, did you feel like you were able to get a feel for program culture? Was there anything you did outside of the interview to assist with this?
Yeah, I think that is a challenge. It's like comparing apples to oranges because you feel like you know so much more about a program that you interviewed at in person versus virtually. And so UC Davis was actually a virtual, and I knew it was, I was super interested in the program from a location perspective and wanting to get West Coast and some of its opportunities with D1 sports and a good mix of ultrasound. So I knew I was interested. So one of the things that I found really helpful was actually talking, because obviously the current fellow has only been there a couple months and he gave me some good info, but it's really helpful to talk to recent fellows that have graduated and maybe have a little bit more neutral feedback or a little bit more objective about things. And so what I did actually was I utilized as an AMSSM member, you can, once you log in on the website, you can look up the member directory. So you can look up names of people that are members of AMSSM and they always have an email. And I actually cold emailed 4 to 5 recent fellows from programs that I was really interested in that I had never met, and honestly was shocked how many people responded like, yeah, happy to talk with you about this program. And so that was really helpful. So I just met some people that I would not have otherwise met, and that was a tremendous value just to talk to those fellows and gave me a lot more comfort with some of the virtual interview places.
Yeah, this is a great
Yeah,
question.
I
It
mean,
is. Oh, go
no,
ahead. Go ahead.
Cam, sorry. Um, I Yeah, I didn't cold reach out that way, the way that Lori did, but I did kind of reach out to former fellows at programs I was interested in. Um, it ended up being that a lot of people I talked to I ended up interviewing in person at some of those programs. I felt like the downside of the virtual interviews is really just kind of seeing some of just the clinical spaces to some degree. And I just like conversing and having the in-person experience. But I feel pretty lucky that most of the virtual interviews we had, felt like I got a good sense of kind of the culture of the program and what they were prioritizing and kind of what the year was kind of just going to look like from a logistical standpoint and kind of how your experience was going to kind of be laid out. I think most programs who were doing virtual interviews structure them fairly well. They can be long and just kind of, come with all of the downsides of just being on your computer for a long time. But I don't think that I really had a bad experience from that perspective of feeling like I missed out on knowing about the culture of the program or what it would be like to kind of be the fellow there to some degree.
Yeah, I'll echo what Andrew said. Like I felt like I also got a good sense of the culture just, from a virtual side. I don't know how much it would have changed even just being there in person. Sometimes you can just tell from like also just how the vibes are from the interviews. Who are your interviewers? Some of these programs you have like athletic trainers or PTs who are interviewing you. So that kind of tells you, it's like that can kind of give you a sense of, how integrated and well-rounded, program might be. They may have other like specialties, orthopedic surgeons, internal medicine physicians who are also interviewing you. So like sometimes you can get a sense of a culture that way just from like who's interviewing you. Um, Also, I guess, how many people are interviewing you, right? If there's like I know there were some programs that I interviewed at where there was like at least like 8 or 9 people that was like interviewing me. So it was like, okay, like there's definitely like a lot of like exposure and teaching going on there, just from that sense.
I would just add, so I think the in-person interview is obviously a lot more like logistical hoops to jump through to make it happen. I found them a lot more like fun, kind of, and engaging, not just because you're getting to meet the people at the program, but getting to meet the other applicants, going to the kind of pre-interview social was a lot of fun as well. So I guess as I was going through the process, I did worry a little bit that that was maybe coloring my perspective of the programs that I was interviewing at in person relative to the ones that I was interviewing virtually at. So I just tried to be mindful of that. And then, yeah, like Lori and the others have said, just filling in any gaps or questions that I had with trying to reach out to people who had more familiarity with the program, I thought was, it kind of ended up making it feel more apples to apples.
All right, I think we can move on to the next question here. So this question's from Yamiyu. Were there specific questions you asked on the interview trail that swayed your decision one way or another? Or, otherwise said, what questions moved the needle for you on your rank list?
One thing for me that moved the needle was places that have actual acute injury exposure, especially as a PM&R resident. That is an area where we just don't have a lot of experience. And if you don't really have an interest in being a team physician long term, that may not be something that's very important to you in the fellowship, probably shouldn't be. But if you are someone that sees yourself, I was interested in being a team physician in the future, I really felt like that was an area I wanted to shore up. And that's an area that it's just hard to find those opportunities. Most fellowships, most PM&R based, are not necessarily getting people in the door that are acute injuries regularly. So, like, what is the vehicle for that? Beyond, so the thing I would ask would be, what type of acute injury exposure do you have? Is it primarily whatever you see on the sideline, or are there other experiences? And so, some places might have an actual orthopedic, like acute injury clinic you're working in. Like Davis, UC Davis, and several other programs have a ski clinic. And so that's a whole month where you're just seeing trauma. And so to me, that was something I really prioritized, is finding out, trying to tease out what is the actual exposure to those acute injuries.
Well, going along with what Lori just mentioned, what programs describe or advertise on the websites may not necessarily be true. So just like Lori said, if they mention something about sports coverage, make sure you ask what kind of sports coverage that you'll be doing. Is it going to be something that you'll be taking along with attendings, or is it going to be something that you'll be covering independently? For the pro coverage and high level Division One, truthfully, there's no way you're going to be there by yourself. You're going to be most likely shadowing along the attendings. So it's a very cool experience to be in the big stadium, but you're not going to get your hands on in terms of managing the patient. So in that regard, you might be going to programs where you might be covering maybe lower level colleges, but where you will be the team physician who's doing the training room independently and who's covering those games independently. And also for those who are interested in maybe procedures, there are programs out there that advertise, we're doing this and that, we have high volume, but make sure that you're getting hands-on and doing it independently, because some of the advanced procedures or newer ultrasound guided minimal invasive procedures, fellows may not necessarily be hands-on, and the volumes that they're doing may not be as high as you're hoping for. So if that's you're looking for, make sure you speak with the fellows, not the attendings, and make sure that they're getting good amount of hands-on to learn those procedures.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah, I
follow up
would
with
add
each.
like there.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Ryan. I just keep interrupting everyone. Um, the only thing there were two questions that I think are two points that really moved the needle for me. I think one was um, ultrasound curriculum, or just kind of didactics and education in general. Like I really wanted a program that had kind of a well-structured didactic curriculum and a well-structured ultrasound curriculum. Um, and some programs will say, oh yeah, you learn ultrasound, we do diagnostic ultrasound, but sometimes it's just more on the fly or it's taught in clinic. And I really try to kind of dig a little bit deeper to see, okay, how often are the fellows scanning with attendings? Is there time kind of set aside to do this with your attending to kind of learn outside of clinic, rather than just trying to kind of do it in an actual patient visit where you might not have the time to really ask the questions that you have or feel like you can kind of synthesize some of that information. So that education component for me was really important because, this is kind of like our last year of training where you have somebody as a resource to kind of go to and really learn from. And I think the second thing was just the flexibility or the willingness of the program director to kind of advocate for you to seek out alternative experiences. So if the program doesn't necessarily have something, are they willing to work with you to set something up outside of the program? And are they willing to kind of advocate for you in that sense to say, hey, we want to make this year the best experience. And if you're willing to kind of put the work in to set something up, we're there to support you and we're going to kind of get you to where you want to be. And that I think kind of extends to, helping with jobs and career development and all of that, all of those experiences. So those were the kind of the two things that I asked a fair amount of questions about when it came to the program director and kind of faculty.
Yeah, I mean, all these answers are like specific questions that I was asking each program. The acute injury exposure, the big one that like always moved the needle for me. Like I was actually primarily looking for a primary care based program or like where I could be trained to be a good team physician. So acute injury was super important. But I have an awesome ultrasound base that we built from PM&R, and I didn't want to lose that. So I asked every program, like for the attending, I would ask, hey, what does the guided autonomy look like for your ultrasound curriculum, both in clinic and didactics? Like Andrew was saying, I didn't want one where it was just on the fly, but I tried to gauge what the attendings were saying to me, like when did they get the fellow involved and how early. And then once you are interviewing with a fellow, you can just ask them like, what's the procedure volume been like? And like, you'll have some fellows be like, they're 3 months in, like, yeah, I've done 300 plus ultrasound guided injection at this point. And the other ones are like, yeah, I'm hoping to get started maybe later in November. And you're like, well, that's halfway through fellowship. So those ones made a really big difference for me. And I think it's a little bit of a nuanced question. You don't ask the program director. I mean, you can what the volume is, but you can probably get a better feel from the fellow. But you can maybe ask more roundabout to the attendings. And you can do that for a lot of different questions. But yeah, I think the acute injury, the sideline coverage, who we're actually covering, and what the autonomy is, both for procedures and coverage, is a really important question to ask.
And I think the only thing I'd add is just important to keep in mind that like it's very different than residency interviews in the sense that like a lot about medicine. Like I think you are seen more as like a peer during these interviews than someone who doesn't have a lot of experience. And so it really is your time, like really to think about where you want to be in 5 to 10 years, what sort of training you need to get yourself there, and then figure out like what questions for you personally are going to help you figure out if that program is going to help you get to where you want to be. That's ultimately like what I tried to reflect on before all the interviews.
All right. Our next question here is from Alyssa. So when applying to family med-based programs that accept PM&R applicants, were there any barriers that you came across as a PM&R applicant? Additionally, how many total programs would you recommend applying to?
I can jump in on this
So
question since I ended up matching at a primary care based program, and it was my favorite program. It's where I wanted to be. Um, I was I came across when I'm going across all these different fellowships. There's you can look to see if they've taken PMR before, which I think is helpful. If you see every year that there's a PMR applicant, you can kind of start to get the idea that they value PMR residents. I interviewed at places that had never taken a PMR resident before. And some seemed very eager. And I just asked them, like, why or why not? And most of the time it's like, oh, we just recently opened up a spot, or like the cards just didn't fall that way. But a lot of times for the programs that aren't taking regular PMR applicants, you really need to dig into what is your continuity clinic going to look like half day a week. Do you have something set up? What do you have in mind? Are you going to a spasticity clinic for your continuity clinic? Are you just working with a PMR sports doc and they're counting that? Are you doing EMGs? Are you doing ultrasound? Are you doing fluoro? what is that continuity clinic going to look like? Different programs had differing levels of plans for that continuity clinic and how to take advantage of your PMR background. And I did run across just some bias on the interviews of people that seemed to be more accepting or less accepting of PMR in the sports medicine world. And you can pick up on it. So just take note of that. Like, let it run off your back if you get a little bit of a dig during an interview. But just make note of that when you're going through your interviews. But for the most part, the programs that I was excited about, they were excited about having me and my skill set, and they had a plan on how to grow that skill set, but also offer me something new that I don't have, like the acute injury exposure.
Yeah, I would say there's probably two big buckets you want to think of when you're thinking about like non-PM&R programs. There's, family med based programs who can take like, where PM&R is an option. They have taken PM&R before. But there's also like family med based programs where there's like a PM&R dedicated slot. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're applying. So the interviews that I went on, all of them had like the non-PM&R programs. Those programs all had a dedicated PM&R slot. So like the program where I'm at Penn, so they have a dedicated PM&R slot, and sometimes that is, I think that like for me, like I didn't have any like barriers really in those interviews because it's like they are used to having PM&R fellows, and they've had it for like several years. So they have like there's a good number of like PM&R attendings along with other multidisciplinary attendings as well. So the continuity clinic and kind of everything there is already established. So that's just something to keep in mind, that there's programs that have slots and ones that don't, and it's I think for me, I didn't have that experience interviewing at programs that did not have those dedicated slots. But I would say those are just some key things to keep in mind. In terms of total programs, I would say like just I would base that off of really like really try to assess your own competitiveness, financial, geographic situation. I basically interviewed anywhere from like 20 to 30, but people have applied below that and above that, and I think it just really depends on multiple factors.
And I think I applied to like mid 30s. Like I applied to most of the PMR programs and then maybe like 15 or so primary care. And it was tough to guesstimate how competitive you're going to be. It's easier to turn down interviews than regret not sending them out in the first place.
Listen, the only thing I'd add to these good answers is that typically in those programs you're going to be in more of a mixed applicant setup. EM, FM, IM, PEDS. Um, and I think anytime that sort of situation occurs, it's easy to start to compare yourself to other applicants. And so you guys are all amazing. As PM&R physicians, you bring so much to patients and their recovery, that just uh, you don't need to compare yourself to anyone else. You bring a lot to the table. That's all I would say there. Okay, so I'm going to kind of ask the panelists to sort of bring it back a couple of years, in your memory here. So thinking back, what clinical and extracurricular experiences or activities did you prioritize as an early trainee to prepare for your fellowship application?
Cam, go ahead. We just unmuted again. Go ahead.
So I got involved with coverage as early as I could in residency. I think that's a great way to get to know kind of the sports faculty in your area. And if there's not sports faculty in your program, at least kind of sports faculty in your geographic area, it's a great way to build connections that way and get exposure. And the questions about your coverage experience come up a lot in interviews. And I think they're seen really favorably on applications as well. So that's a big one. I think some sort of research project or a review article, or getting involved with some sort of scholarly activity with someone in a sports department or a nearby sports program as also seen favorably. And then I really prioritized electives, so I had some opportunities for some sports med elective time, one, just, opportunities for letters of recommendation by doing more elective time, had more exposure, more potential people who could write me letters. But two, just felt more confident kind of talking about those experiences during interviews and, feeling more comfortable with my procedural skills and being able to talk confidently about my ultrasound exposure and those sorts of things.
Coverage is obviously there's no coverage can start too early, and having kind of good continuity and being able to talk about, like Cam said, you have diverse experiences with different athletes and talking about how you kind of work consistently with either ATs and other types of providers, I think is important. In addition to kind of like your standard, get as much research and presentation, or conference exposure as you can. I found that like leadership opportunities either within GME or within your program and kind of like educational roles, I think can be a really good way to kind of make yourself stand out in an application process. They came up a lot when I was applying, and they don't have to be, it doesn't have to be like you're in this kind of national role or position. Those are great if you want to be a part of those types of committees and in those roles, but even just kind of working kind of locally, either within your GME or within your program, or within your hospital system, I think is a nice way to kind of demonstrate these leadership capabilities that a lot of programs are going to be seeking in applicants. As a fellow, and as a sports med doc, you're realistically going to be interacting with an interdisciplinary team where you kind of have to take charge and make decisions independently. And I think that being put into those types of leadership and educational roles can prepare you well for that. And a lot of those skills translate. And I think it's just they're good opportunities to kind of learn from, in addition to kind of your standard, like, get as much PM&R or sports exposure, like we kind of talk about.
Yeah, going off of what Andrew said, with coverage specifically, as you have more experience, try to, if it's possible within your institution, try to get more of like independent coverage, especially in sports like football, where there's like high acuity of injuries. I think that is looked upon more favorably as well. And then in terms of, opportunities, like definitely look within your institution, if you guys have a fellowship. If not, other things to utilize is doing like away rotations. And so that is something to really think about, and it does require a lot of planning. So, if you're interested in doing an away rotation, and your schedule with your elective that you have, make sure you plan it in like months in advance, and start that process early. Especially if you want to get not just exposure, but if you're interested in that program, interested in that geographic location. And I think it's also good to just see like, how a different institution, different sports medicine operates outside of your own. So I would say like those are a couple things to add, but echo everything else, like finding, leadership opportunities, whether within AMSSM, AP, within within your institution, and then just, doing your best on all your rotations.
Yeah, I think a lot of good things have been mentioned that I absolutely agree with. One other thing that I would think about, if you have an opportunity to be involved in any sort of primary care thing as a PM&R person, I would hop on that. Because one thing that you're perceived to be as a PM&R person is that you're unable to treat an upper respiratory infection, right? That's kind of a perception that some of the primary care programs will have. And so me, I had a unique background. I was a primary care physician in the Navy before I came back to residency. So that was just like, people thought that was the greatest thing ever, that I'd done any primary care. But I understand, obviously, most people are not going to have that opportunity. But if you have a chance to do like sports physicals with people, pre-participation, or if there's a moonlighting opportunity where you can work in an urgent care and be able to say like, yes, I did these things. I treated a UTI successfully. People that'll really be a selling point, especially if you're trying to pitch yourself as someone interested in being a team physician and being well-rounded. So something to keep in mind. If you're able to get it, obviously not essential. You don't have many opportunities in PM&R.
Yeah, and I think I can just echo what everyone else is saying. I'll add a little bit to what Lori said. Like, coming from a PMR background, trying to sell myself as wanting to be a team physician. One of the things that I did like mention, for us, like we were primary for all our patients on a standalone rehab. So it ends up being a little bit of a mixed of acuity of things. Maybe not as high level as if they were at the inpatient hospital. But guess what? I was the on-call doc overnight, the code team, the whatever. Someone had a cold, the family wanted to talk. So I brought that up in my interviews when they asked about primary care coverage and what I can do or not do. So I brought that up. All of us worked on the floors. All of us did an intern year. So you can draw back on those experiences. The other thing that I don't think was mentioned is from like an education or ultrasound standpoint, say yes. If someone asks you to do a lecture, say yes. If someone offers, you have the opportunity to teach med students on a regular basis, say yes. Because guess what? Now you have a section on your CV where you have 10 lectures listed. And even if it was just to your residency class, that's great. Like as part of our didactic program, we had to do maybe 4 lectures a year. Well, there were 3 different residency programs there. So I put all that stuff on my application. And then when there was teaching at the local medical schools for ultrasound, I said yes to those opportunities and I went. So those are all ways that you can get involved and show interest in education if you're thinking of being an academic physician. And then sideline coverage was tough. I remember I was trying to get that early on and I was struggling to get it. But I said yes to every opportunity to do pre-participation physicals, or an adaptive sports event was happening nearby. Well, I went with the doc that did that. So I think being willing to say yes to opportunities, even if you haven't quite shaped or have 100% idea what you want to do, those are all great things that look good on a application, and you start to figure out what you may or may not want in the future too.
All right. The next question here is from Lorena. It's about coverage. So is there any coverage that you would have liked to do while you were a resident that you didn't get to do? Or was there anything that came up during the interview process, coverage wise, that you wish you had done?
I think one of the questions that did come up is if I had done independent coverage. And at the time, I had not yet. Our program was in the process of like making opportunities for independent coverage. So I actually did it as a 4th-year resident. And we were just starting when I was on my like on the interview trail. So I mentioned that I was planning this for the rest of winter. I was covering a specific basketball team, but I think independent coverage, like Raj alluded to earlier, is excellent when possible. It might not be allowed by your GME, so you just might have to work with what you have. I did have like random questions about like, oh, how would you reduce a shoulder or something, or have you reduced a shoulder? So I think using your coverage opportunities for like maybe more higher yield coverage like football is great, because then you get to see those things, but you have to work with what you have. You are somewhat limited by just what your program has to offer.
One thing that came up a couple of times on interviews, I felt like it was helpful to have had experiences in multiple sports. So, that just helped answer certain questions that came up. And then it seemed like it was nice sometimes to be able to talk about the continuity. So, covering the same football team, like 3 or 4 games in a season was, helpful to be able to talk through like an athlete that you saw get injured and then you got to see the recovery back to play, those sorts of questions. So I thought that was helpful. Going back, so Ryan mentioned like, if there's a gap, or if they're, questioning a specific area that maybe you haven't had an opportunity to get exposure to yet. Like, I think just like you mentioned, being honest about the fact that you haven't had those opportunities, but then, like mentioning that I want to be a team doctor, like I want the fellowship year to fill in those gaps. Like that is exactly what I'm looking for. And so I want your program to be able to fill those gaps in, or, whatever, however it fits for you. But I think just being honest about that and like why you're interested in those programs that maybe have slightly different coverage experiences than you've had exposure to thus far.
Yeah, I would say for me, like at least during my residency, we had a lot of opportunities for, for a variety of sports to cover. I think one thing that I guess I wish it was just like having, I guess more of a continuity, because I would start building relationship with like coaches and athletes, And then it's like, then like the season ends or like another resident's coming, covering like that sport the next week or whatever. So, but again, that's like the purpose of fellowship, right? Is, at least for most programs, you're going to be taking care of, a team and you're going to, have more continuity that way. So I think for me, that was just kind of the only thing, but I think just, it depends on the program where you're at and if they have those opportunities. So luckily at my program, there's just a lot of coverage opportunities, for like all levels. So just, making sure to maximize and utilize those opportunities.
All right, the next question here is about letters of rec. So what was the mix of your letter writers essentially? Did you have all PM&R physicians, any family medicine, peds, EM, especially considering what programs you were looking at, whether they were primary care based or PM&R based? How did you guys approach that?
I can start with this one. I had three core faculty for pretty much all of my letters. Usually, I mean, it feels like it's been forever, so correct me if I'm wrong, guys. Most programs like usually only take about three letters, if I remember correctly, and then sometimes they'll like flex in a fourth if you want to add an optional fourth letter. Um, I think the standard, at least that was kind of passed along to down to me and kind of within our program was our program director. So our residency program director was one letter. Um, and then if your program has a sports fellowship program, if you are able to get a strong letter of recommendation from the fellowship director at your institution, I think that goes a long way. Especially kind of within the academic circles or within AMSSM, like, people know people. And I think that if you're able to work with your sports fellowship program director at your institution and get a letter from them, it can really help your application. Um, my third letter was a very close research mentor of mine. I'm in DC, so we get to go to NIH, and she kind of has this unique role at the NIH clinically and in a research role. So she kind of filled a little like two gaps for me, and she's PM&R trained primarily. So I didn't have a primary care provider or sports medicine provider write a letter of mine. I didn't feel like it got in the way of me getting some of the primary care based interviews and interview offers from that perspective. So all of mine were PM&R. I think it's really just who's going to be able to write you a really strong letter and speak to your clinical skills and kind of your interests and desire to kind of be in sports.
Yeah, I would echo that. Like, I wouldn't wait too much on like who like the specialty and just make sure like these that your letter writers know you really well. Like all I think so I had, for some of the programs I had four, but most of them, the three that I had were PM&R, and I matched at a FM based program. So, and one was the fellowship director, and then one was the program director, and then one was just another sports attending that I worked with. And then my fourth was my research. So that was for my research mentor throughout residency. And for me, that was one of my big things that I wanted out of for fellowship and for mainly for my career. So I kind of pick and chose and targeted that fourth letter of rec to certain programs.
And just to add, I had the luxury of reviewing this year's sports medicine applicants letters. But also, it's a very small community, and if you like somebody, we go beyond the letters and we actually reach out to some of the attendings in other programs just to do a little background check, just to make sure that, the person that is being described in the recommendation letter is the true person that they are. So just, keep in mind that, whoever you work with, just be yourself, do your best, not just to the letter writers, because that discrepancy will probably be not good for you. And just keep in mind that, less much so compared to the residency application, because it's such a small world and we kind of know each other pretty well, that we will talk about application behind our scenes and we will try our best to know more about applicants behind the scenes beyond just the letters.
It's great advice, HC. All right, so we have about 14 minutes left. I'm going to ask one more question from the audience here, and then I'll give all the panelists an opportunity to give their closing remarks. So this last question here is from Melissa, and it's in regards to organizing your ERAS application. So she asked specifically, do you recommend listing out all of your coverage events in one experience and list form, or do you suggest picking a few impactful ones and use the space to explain more? And then secondly, if you guys have any other advice on how you organized your ERAS experiences, we'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I actually have mine pulled up. So, the way I organized it was, there's like 10 experiences, and so one of my boxes, one of my experiences, I put as sideline physician, medical volunteer, and then I basically listed out kind of a couple buckets: high school football, high school, like I did high school lacrosse, and then collegiate was like my third bullet. And then the fourth and fifth bullet points were my pre-participation physicals and adaptive sports. And then for each of those, I just basically put down the school, the name of the school, and then in parentheses, just like the number of games that I did for each of those. Um, and then, if your institution allows it, put an asterisk on like if it was solo coverage or not. So I added that as that was kind of like my main like sideline coverage box. So I kept it under one experience, and then I just had another box that was like additional sports medicine experience. So these were just like things I was involved in through AMSSM, any like non-medical volunteering. So I did some like non-medical volunteering with like the USA Paralympic swimming, and then just like rotations and conferences that I had throughout residency. So that's kind of, I'd say like that was kind of like my, I guess you could call it miscellaneous bucket that wasn't like sideline coverage. But that was just the way I did it. I think, there's a lot of different ways that you could do it as well.
I did exactly what Raj did. Don't waste your spaces listing separate sideline coverage experiences. Just make a nice list, delineate how many games you did or how many seasons you covered, and then you can add like little asterisks here and there to clarify um, the degree of the coverage. I think that's excellent. The other part of this is you get to choose three most meaningful experiences to expand a little bit more on. It's literally like an extra three sentences, so it's not like much. Um, so you can kind of play with what you found most meaningful and kind of help frame yourself as an applicant. I chose to do sideline coverage for one of them just because I want to be a team physician. But the other ones I did was ultrasound education. So I just listed out again all the different ultrasound things I had done since I had been a resident, and then explained in the most meaningful few sentences why that was important to me. And then I also had like research as my third one, but everyone's going to be a little bit different on what they is most meaningful to them. But take advantage of this to frame yourself as an applicant. And then I actually included two experiences prior to residency that were important to me. That I listed like an AmeriCorps year. And then I also listed when I was like some healthcare work that I did before I was an athletic trainer for a short period of time and like a nursing aide. And I put that on there because it was important to me. Um, so yeah, you have a lot of flexibility with this, but don't waste spots trying to list teaching or research or sideline coverage separate. Group them together.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I took a number of years before medical school, so I'm kind of had experiences that felt like they spoke to who I was as an applicant and just kind of an individual, and kind of what kind of created my interest in sports med and kind of led to kind of where I was as an applicant. And I think those experiences are totally reasonable to be able to put on those 10 experiences to kind of speak to who you are. And those things will come through in an interview. And I think that it's totally reasonable to, even talk about if you were a collegiate student athlete back in the day, even if it feels like it was a lifetime ago. like those are things to speak to who you are and kind of, helps you answer a lot of questions in interviews, writes your personal statement for you. So I think that they can be important. And so like everyone's saying, don't waste those spaces on just, separating out coverage experiences if you have, the space and if you're trying to kind of fit in other experiences that you have.
One other thing to add on ERAS that I found that I stole from, I think, one of these sessions in prior years was just thinking about how the research works is that essentially you can list something if it's actually published, obviously it gets put in the bibliography, and then if it's actually officially submitted somewhere. But I think most of us have a project or two maybe that we've spent a ton of time on that's not yet submitted. And so like what I did, if there was, my research and residency, I had kind of two big projects that I knew. So I was able to just say, like, here's these two big projects I'm working on. Here's a quick one-liner about them. And I anticipate submission in the next 6 months or something. That way I could at least reflect like all this work I had been doing and wanted to talk about on the interview trail. So that's something that you can use one of your experiences for as some of your current research.
All right. Before we close, I just want to give every panelist the chance to share their single most important piece of advice for residents or med students preparing for a career in sports medicine and a trajectory that leads them towards the match that you all just successfully completed.
I can start. I feel pretty passionately that you've got to find your person. Fellowship is such a unique experience that for me, I think find the people who you connect with, find the people that are going to invest in you and advocate for you. Everybody's experience is going to be slightly different, and that's okay. We're all going to learn as attendings and things like that, and even throughout the year. My single piece of advice is find people that you want to work with, you want to learn from, and that you feel like are going to be just as invested in your education and your experience as a fellow. And that's going to be a mentor for not just your fellowship year, but for years to come, and someone you can call, ask questions about careers and life and other advice as you kind of go through this process. I think that that is something that I feel like I found I got really lucky with, and it's just kind of the single thing that I would tell people to kind of look for as they go through this process, because you can get pulled in a lot of different directions. And, if you have something that's just grounding you like that, I think it can be helpful to kind of wade through a lot of the decision-making process.
That was awesome. Yeah, I will echo what Andrew says. I think just being genuine to who you are, right? Like your experiences throughout residency, leading up to your interviews. Just be genuine to who you are, like what you want in your career. Um, and don't try to like oversell certain things just because maybe a program, you've heard like certain aspects, like regardless of what that is, like just be true to yourself, right? And how you do in your interviews and how you like, they'll be able to tell how passionate you are about certain things, right? So I think it'll just come off naturally. Like your CV is a reflection of you, but being able to articulate that and being genuine throughout this process, I think that's just something to keep in mind. For me, I kind of went back to, going back to the first three things I mentioned with geography, skill set, and mentorship. For me, those are the three big things I was looking at. And for me, out of those three, the most important thing was mentorship, right? Because it's a 1 year fellowship. I mean, it's basically you got to think of it as an apprenticeship, right? Who are going to be people that are going to be invested in you, and your goals. So I think that's something that you can really find out throughout residency, throughout these interviews, and just being genuine to who you are.
I think from my perspective, I think one thing to add as well to all these wonderful insights here from my colleagues is really just, unlike residency interviews, where I much more felt like maybe there were only a handful of programs that I was really excited about, I legitimately would leave most interviews and be like, I could be happy there. That sounds great, because it's sports medicine. And so it's something you're excited about. And so I think that you'll find, hopefully that you'll come to a rank list where you're like, okay, there's like 7 or 8 places here that if I landed at this place, I certainly wouldn't be devastated. Like I'd be excited. I'm going to learn sports medicine. And so I think kind of keeping that in mind and not trying to put so much pressure on yourself. There's a lot of outside noise sometimes that, oh my gosh, if you don't match it, like these 2 or 3 paces, like you're never going to be able to do a ultrasound guided injection again. There's a lot of hype about, oh my gosh, there's only 3 programs you can learn ultrasound. And I think in the year 2026, that's a little bit overblown. I think there's a lot of great programs out there that you can learn those procedural skills that a lot of us in PM&R are interested in. And so, you're somewhat limited just by how hard you want to work at it to acquire these skills. And so I think keeping that in mind and just looking forward to that process. It's a lot of work with ERAS, but looking forward to the process of like, yes, all these programs. I'm like, this would be great in sports medicine. So just keeping that in mind was helpful for me.
Yeah, I would just say first, congratulations. Like, it's incredible that you guys have made it this far. You've already put in a lot of work for those of you who are applying this cycle. Like, this is the payoff period, and it is a lot of fun. It's a really formative process to go through. Like, I mean, I alluded to this before, but I think it's super important to, reflect, spend a lot of time reflecting as you're putting together your ERAS. Like, think about all the things you've done over the past few years and how that contributes to where you want to go. And then having like a really, if it's not a concrete picture, at least a pretty good idea of what that is going to look like or what your ideal practice setup is in 5 years, and then being really intentional about finding programs that are going to help you get there. And then it's just super cool to like meet, people that you've seen give presentations at AMSSM. You'll be sitting down one-to-one with them in interviews. That's a super cool experience. I was lucky enough to meet, I think, every single person on this panel. If I hadn't met them before, I got to meet them at interviews this year. Like, it shrinks the field. You start to recognize everybody at AMSSM when you go back. It's just like a really cool experience. So, if you can, I know it is stressful, but just try your best to enjoy it and soak it all in.
I'll be real brief, but yes, be proud of where you've gotten, how you've gotten to this point. Represent yourself well, but also come across as humble and eager for what this fellowship year can offer. You built this awesome application. Be excited and proud about it, but also be excited about this year. And I think that eagerness and your passions will come across well in your interview.
I'll be brief too. Just like Raj said, be honest. Don't fake it because we can look through it. And people underestimate interviews, but make sure you prepare for the fellowship interviews because it can really change. And I feel like compared to the residency interview, residents tend to underestimate the importance of the fellowship interview. So make sure you go over what are the common questions that have been asked and make sure that you have well-organized answers for those questions, because it looks really bad from the interviewer's perspective when applicants are not as prepared and they don't seem enthusiastic.
All right, perfect note to end on. So on behalf of the Sports Medicine Fellow Council, thank you to our panelists for sharing your experience, your insights so openly tonight. This was awesome. I mean, this is exactly the kind of resource that our residents, our med students all need. So thank you. Thank you for your time. To everyone joining us, there's 3 more webinars in this series. This Monday at 8 o'clock Eastern, we'll hear from a panel of sports medicine program directors alongside some current residents and or incoming fellows and current fellows. And then on Tuesday, June 16th, we have back-to-back sessions. At 7 o'clock Eastern is the EM, IM, and PEDS fellow panel. And then at 8 Eastern is the family medicine panel. So it's been my pleasure to moderate tonight. Thanks everyone for your time and have a good evening.